My name is Aubrey Morgan. I'm 36 years old, living in Monterey, California. By day, I'm a senior investment strategist at a boutique wealth firm. By night, I'm Julian's wife, the college sweetheart I once believed would grow old beside me. We had been together for 12 years, married for 7. There was a time I thought nothing could shatter the quiet trust we built over time. But sometimes the beginning of the end doesn't come with shouting or cheating caught red-handed. Sometimes it arrives silently, like a message lighting up a locked screen. That morning started like any other. I got up before Julian, padded into the bathroom, and turned on the faucet to brush my teeth. His phone sat on the edge of the sink, screen glowing softly in the dim light. I wasn't even looking for it. But there it was, a text preview. 3 days left, same beach, same view, same you in white silk. I froze, not because it was shocking, but because it was expected. I stood there with the toothbrush still in my mouth, foam gathering at the edges of my lips, my eyes fixed on those 22 words. My feet were cold against the tile. Through the cracked door, I could hear Julian humming softly as the water ran down his back in the shower. He was getting ready for work like everything was normal. But I wasn't in that normal anymore. I didn't unlock the phone. I didn't need to. That message wasn't a guess. It was confirmation. I had been watching the cracks spread for months now. The quiet distance, the weekend client meetings in San Francisco, the phone that suddenly never left his hand. He used to laugh at people who brought their phones into the bathroom. Now he was one of them. His laptop, once an open book, had a new password. The man who used to look at me like I was his entire horizon now looked through me. Like I was wallpaper he was too polite to rip down. I used to whisper to myself, maybe you're overthinking it, Aubrey. Maybe he's just stressed. But that morning, I didn't need to wonder anymore. I rinsed my mouth, washed my face, dried my hands, did my makeup with calm, practiced fingers. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. What I felt was something colder, a weightless numbness that made everything look sharp and bright like I was watching my own life from behind glass. When I walked out of the bathroom, Julian was standing in front of the mirror tying his tie. He looked at me and smiled. "Morning," he said like always. "Morning," I replied, my voice steady. He smoothed his collar. "I've got a site visit in Half Moon Bay this weekend. I'll be back Sunday evening." I nodded. "Be sure to pack a sweater. Gets chilly near the water." He kissed me on the cheek and grabbed his keys. I watched the door close behind him, then turned to look at the mirror where he had just been standing. My own reflection stared back. For a second, I didn't recognize the woman looking at me. But I knew what she was about to do. And I wouldn't say a word. Not until I was ready. That night, Julian came home late. Not suspiciously late, just late enough to seem normal. He tossed his bag on the floor, poured himself a glass of wine, and scrolled through his phone while I reheated leftovers. He didn't notice how I watched him, quietly cataloging every movement, every shrug, every too casual word. He still wore his wedding ring. He still kissed my forehead goodnight. And he still fell asleep on his side of the bed like nothing in the world had changed. But I couldn't sleep, because everything had changed. Around 2 a.m., when his breathing turned deep and even, the same rhythm I used to find comfort in, I slipped out of bed and padded into the kitchen. I sat at the counter with my laptop open, the light glowing soft across the granite. I typed her name into Google, Camille Rivers. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe a photo, a LinkedIn profile, a trace of the woman who had stepped into my life without permission. What I found was more than enough. She was 37, a travel PR consultant based in Santa Rosa. Her client list was high-end resorts, boutique hotels, and private retreat chains, the kind of places Julian suddenly had interest in investing over the last year. She was married. Her husband's name appeared in a conference tag photo, Dr. Noah Rivers, a marine biologist affiliated with a research lab in Mendocino. I clicked on his profile. 40 years old, tall, crisp smile, the kind of eyes that looked like they'd rather be staring at the sea than a camera. I sat with the information for a while, letting it settle, letting the pieces come together like wet sand hardening into shape. Then I wrote the message. I rewrote it at least 10 times before I finally hit send. "Hello, my name is Aubrey Morgan. I believe your wife Camille and my husband Julian are having an affair. I'm not reaching out to hurt anyone, just to confirm what I've already discovered. If you're open to talking, I'm willing to share everything I know. My number is 415-55-8432. I pressed send and stared at the screen. My heart didn't race, it was steady, resigned. 3 hours later, just as the first soft light of dawn touched the sky outside the window, my phone rang. A male voice, deep, tired, guarded. Is this some kind of sick joke? I closed my eyes for a second, then answered quietly, I wish it were. A pause. I have messages, photos, there are plans for this weekend at the house near Bodega Bay, I continued. He didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was lower, controlled. What do you want to do? I tightened my grip on the phone and said what had been forming in the back of my mind since I saw that message in the bathroom. Would you want to meet them there? With me? A long breath. Then finally, meet me first. I need to see what you know. We chose a cafe in Santa Cruz. Neutral ground halfway for both of us. Saturday morning, 10 a.m. As I ended the call and set the phone down on the counter, I realized this wasn't just about Julian anymore. This was about truth. And finally, not being alone with it. The cafe was quiet that morning. Warm wood tables, the soft hiss of espresso machines, sunlight pooling through the tall windows. I got there early and chose a corner booth facing the parking lot. Every person who walked in made me sit a little straighter. Then I saw him, Noah Rivers. He was exactly how he looked in that conference photo. Tall, a little unshaven, eyes a shade too tired for morning. But there was something solid in the way he walked, like even grief couldn't shake him entirely. He spotted me immediately. No smile, no nod, just a small breath as he sat across from me. I'm Noah. Aubrey. I placed my phone on the table and opened the photo gallery. I didn't speak, just tapped and slid the screen toward him. He looked at the texts, the photos. The dinner receipt with Camille's favorite dessert ordered to a resort in Santa Barbara, one Julian had said he stayed at for a real estate retreat. Then came the photo. Camille's toes curled against a teakwood deck, a wine glass, a folded silk robe. Noah froze. I built that deck, he said quietly. Every plank. That's my family's beach house. I didn't look away. Julian told me he had a friend's place on the coast they could use on weekends. Noah leaned back in the booth, jaw tightening. His hands were clasped together, white at the knuckles. I knew something was off, he murmured. She stopped talking to me after I got back from Iceland. Always on her phone. Always distant. I asked once if she was unhappy. She said she was just tired. I nodded slowly. Julian stopped coming home on Fridays. He said Fridays were bad for traffic out of the city. Neither of us laughed. There was no humor left in this part of the story. After a long silence, Noah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small keyring. I still have a key to the house, he said. Camille doesn't know? He shook his head. She told me to toss it months ago. I didn't. Julian thought I was flying to Napa for a client event this weekend. He hadn't even asked for details, just nodded and said, have fun. Noah's voice dropped lower. Then we get there first. No drama, I added. No screaming or rage. Just the truth, he said. And in that moment, two strangers understood each other better than some couples do in a lifetime. The plan wasn't revenge. It wasn't destruction. It was clarity. Letting them walk straight into the silence they created and watch the consequences arrive like a reflection in glass. Sunday morning was windless and cold when I pulled up to the beach house near Bodega Bay. The sky was cloudless, but the air had a sharpness to it. The kind that woke your senses whether you were ready or not. Pines stood tall like silent witnesses around the property, and the house itself looked almost too peaceful, too beautiful to be a stage for what was about to unfold. Noah was already there. His car was parked just to the left of the gravel path. He stood on the porch with a steaming mug in hand, staring out toward the horizon where the sky met the Pacific. "Morning," I said quietly as I approached. He nodded, eyes still on the water. "It's strange being back here." I stepped inside. The air was still, but not stale, just expectant. The last time I had walked through this house, Julian had been holding my waist, kissing my shoulder, promising we'd come back more often. That was the same weekend I miscarried. He drove me to the hospital and never mentioned the trip again. "This house, I lost something here," I said aloud, more to myself than to Noah. "Our child." He said he'd never forget, but now I realize he already had. Noah turned slowly, lowering the mug. "Camille never wanted kids. Or at least, that's what she told me. But last month, she was Googling baby names on her work laptop. I only noticed because I borrowed it to print boarding passes." We didn't cry. There were no theatrics. Just two people standing in the ruins of trust, trying to breathe. We moved around the house, silently working side by side. Noah lit the fireplace. I wiped down the wooden dining table. He brought in a bottle of wine, Camille's favorite, a red blend from Paso Robles. I set out 4 crystal glasses, the kind Julian always insisted on packing. "To keep things elegant," he once said. On the coffee table, I placed a folder. Inside, printed texts, screenshots, bank transfers, and a recording. Julian's own assistant casually confirming there were no official meetings scheduled in Half Moon Bay this weekend. We arranged 2 chairs side by side facing the entryway. It wasn't meant to intimidate. It was meant to confront. When they walked in, they wouldn't be able to look away. From us, from themselves. As we adjusted the lighting, soft amber glow, not too bright, not too dim, I asked, "How do you think they'll react?" Noah didn't look up from the wine bottle. "Camille will panic. Cry maybe. Julian?" He finally turned toward me. "He'll try to charm his way through it, act like it was all just a mistake. But that won't work anymore. Will it?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "Not this time." Then we sat on opposite ends of the couch, the fireplace crackling gently behind us, and waited. Not for them, but for the moment when truth would enter the room before they even opened the door. 5:56 p.m. The golden light outside had started to fade. Inside, the fire flickered gently, casting shadows against the stone wall. The bottle of wine sat unopened on the table. 4 glasses gleamed in the quiet glow. The envelope full of evidence rested between them like a loaded weapon. Noah and I sat still, our faces calm but sharp, like the surface of a frozen lake. Then we heard it. Tires on gravel. The crunch of anticipation. Noah looked at me. I gave a small nod. Through the front window, I watched as the black convertible slowed to a stop. Julian stepped out first. Casual, confident, laughing. He wore the leather jacket I had bought him for our 5th anniversary. It stung in a way I didn't expect. Camille got out next, her long dark hair loose in the breeze, holding a weekend bag and a bouquet of white tulips. They were laughing. They looked like a couple arriving for a honeymoon. The sound of their joy was the cruelest part. Until the front door opened. Camille walked in first. She froze, immediately. Her eyes met mine, wide, unblinking. She stopped so abruptly that Julian, still smiling behind her, bumped into her back. "What?" he started. But then he looked up. His face went blank, then dropped. The gift bag in his hand slipped to the floor. A bottle of champagne rolled out, hit the wood, and cracked at the base. The smell of sparkling alcohol filled the room like some twisted perfume of celebration and ruin. Camille dropped the flowers. The petals scattered across the entryway like a broken apology. "Welcome," I said softly, my voice cool and light. "To your weekend getaway." Noah stood beside me. Julian took a step forward, hands raised slightly, as if trying to rewrite the scene in front of him. "Aubrey, this isn't what I think?" I finished for him. I leaned forward slightly. "Then what exactly is it? The texts, the bookings, the receipts to this very house?" Camille looked at Noah, her voice barely audible. "Noah, I can explain." "No," Noah said sharply. his voice steely but low. You can't. You've already said enough without words. I stood and walked over to the coffee table, lifted the envelope. I didn't come here to shout, I said, meeting Julian's eyes. I came here with facts. This folder contains everything. Messages, transfers, locations, times. Julian took a step back as I placed it on the table in front of him. He didn't reach for it. He just stared at it like it was ticking. You were spying on me? He asked, his voice strained. I tilted my head slightly. No, I was verifying what I already knew. Because you were too careful, too perfect, so I had to become sharper than your lies. Camille slowly sat down in the corner armchair, her hands shaking. Noah didn't move toward her. He just turned away, facing the window. How long? He asked, not looking back. Camille hesitated, then whispered, 8 months. No one spoke. No one moved. Julian broke the silence. Aubrey, I made a mistake. But that doesn't erase everything we had. I looked at him, this man who once held my entire heart, and said with steady finality, No, Julian, but it erases who you claim to be. Julian ran a hand through his hair, pacing now, like he needed to walk his way out of this reality. Camille sat still in the armchair, her face pale, mascara smudged under both eyes. The room was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock and the fire gently crackling behind us. Noah still faced the window, his posture stiff, arms crossed. It wasn't rage, just something heavier. Disappointment so thick it left no space for shouting. I wasn't trying to fall in love, Camille finally said. Her voice was barely audible. It just happened. Noah turned around. His eyes weren't angry, just hollow. You weren't trying? Was that your excuse each time you kissed him in a place I designed? Did it happen to you, or did you let it? Camille buried her face in her hands. Julian stepped forward. Aubrey, please. You know me. You know I've been under pressure for months. The business, the expansion? I laughed softly. Pressure? That's the word you're going with? You think pressure justifies this? He dropped his hands. You've been cold, distant, obsessed with work. I felt invisible. Then you should have talked to me, I said, my voice like ice. Not found validation in the arms of another man's wife. Noah now stepped forward. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Camille, he said calmly. A few weeks ago, you left a voice recording running by accident. You never realized it, but it uploaded to our shared cloud. I didn't listen to it at first. But after Aubrey contacted me, I did. He tapped the screen and hit play. Her voice filled the room. Laughter. Followed by, she still thinks he wants a baby with her. Poor thing doesn't realize he's just playing house until I can finally get him out of that marriage. I mean, she had a miscarriage and still thinks he's coming back? That's just sad. The silence that followed was electric. Camille looked like she'd stopped breathing. Julian froze. My body went completely still. The fire behind me popped loudly, like it was punctuating the pain in my chest. You mocked me? I whispered. You knew what that child meant to me. Camille's voice cracked. I didn't mean it like that. I was just angry that night. Drunk. I wasn't, I replied. I was just grieving, alone. And now I realize you two were already together. Noah looked at her and said quietly, I loved you. I never doubted you. That was my mistake. Then, as if the night couldn't twist further, Camille stood, her hands pressed against the sides of the chair. There's something else, she said. Her voice shook. I didn't plan to say this here, but I'm pregnant. The room froze again. Julian blinked. What? Camille nodded. I found out a week ago. I was going to tell you this weekend. Noah's face drained of color. He asked, Is it mine? Camille hesitated, then softly, Yes, I'm sure. Julian and I'd always used protection. I stepped back like the wind had been knocked from me. Not out of betrayal, not anymore, but from the staggering complexity that just landed in the room. Julian looked at Camille like she had betrayed him now. The lines between villain and victim had begun to blur. I stared at the woman in front of me and thought, this isn't about love. It never was. It's about escape. Escape from boredom. Escape from responsibility. Escape from pain. And now no one could run anymore. The room was still. Not silent, because silence can be peaceful. This was something heavier, like air thick with the smoke of a truth just set ablaze. Camille stood like she didn't know whether to collapse or defend herself. Her hands instinctively moved to her abdomen, cradling what she'd just revealed. Julian looked at her like she'd slapped him. He stepped back, confused, humiliated. "You're pregnant with his child?" he said, his voice low but trembling. "Don't call it his," Camille snapped, showing, for the first time, something close to strength. "This child isn't about either of you. I never meant for any of this to happen." Noah crossed his arms. "That's the second time you've said that. And both times you made a choice. Just like every text, every trip, every lie." She turned to him, her eyes watery but focused. "I was lonely. You were always gone. You buried yourself in oceans, fieldwork, your data, while I stayed home and disappeared." Noah stared at her. "You disappeared the moment you stopped telling the truth." Julian looked completely lost now, his usual self-assurance crumbling. "Aubrey," he began, "I know this looks—" "No," I interrupted. "It doesn't look like anything, Julian. It is exactly what it is." I pulled a folder from my bag and set it on the table. A thick, clean stack of neatly organized documents. I slid it toward him. "What's this?" he asked, though I could already see recognition in his eyes. "Divorce petition," I said, "and all the legal documentation for the separation of assets." He opened it slowly. His eyes scanned the titles. He saw the property listings, the brokerage account numbers, the frozen joint credit lines. "I've transferred our shared assets into a separate account. All traceable. All legal. You'll find the cabin's deed has been reassigned for sale. I don't want it." Julian was speechless. He always thought he held the power because he was the more charming one. The talker. The one people forgave. But charm doesn't stand up well in the face of cold, hard truth. "You can refuse to sign it," I said. "That's your choice. But my attorney is already prepared for that too." Camille lowered herself back into the chair, her arms wrapping protectively around her stomach. She didn't speak. Noah looked at her and said, "If you're keeping the baby, I'll take responsibility. I may not trust you anymore, but I won't abandon an innocent child." She looked up at him, tearful. "Thank you for still being able to say that." He nodded, just once, but his eyes never softened. I turned to Julian. "You once said we were a team," I said quietly. "But I was the only one carrying the weight. I paid the mortgage on this house every month while you played poker with old friends and drove 2 hours to meet her behind my back." "I didn't plan to lose you," Julian said. I didn't think you'd ever leave." And there it was. The real confession. He never thought I had it in me. "I didn't plan to leave," I replied, "until I realized you were already gone." Noah was the first to stand, not with anger, just quiet resolve. He turned to Camille. "I'll be in touch. But we're done. Not just because of what you did, but because you couldn't say it out loud until now." Camille nodded without speaking, her arms still wrapped around her body like she was trying to hold herself together. I followed. I picked up my coat, placed a pen on the divorce packet still sitting untouched in front of Julian, and looked at the man I had once loved with every fiber of who I was. "I'm not asking for a speech," I said, "and I don't need closure. I gave myself that the moment I chose to come here." Julian looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed, voice hoarse. "Aubrey, I made a mistake." "No," I said gently. "You made a series of choices, and now I'm making mine." We left without another word. The air outside had cooled even more. The wind from the ocean rolled softly across the hilltops, brushing our coats as Noah and I walked down the gravel path together. The sound of the door shutting behind us felt final. We didn't speak until we reached the cars. Noah opened my door, paused, then asked, "You hungry?" I blinked. "What?" "There's a small place just down the coast," he said. "Not fancy, but they do a decent grilled cheese and the best tomato soup I've ever had." A laugh escaped me, quiet, raw, but real. "I could eat," I said. That evening, we sat at a worn wooden table by the window of a quiet seaside diner. We didn't talk about Camille or Julian. We didn't talk about betrayal. Instead, we talked about books, places we hadn't seen yet, music, peaceful things. It wasn't romance, it wasn't even healing. It was something simpler, more important. It was human. 6 months later, I live in a small cottage along the cliffs of Mendocino, alone, on purpose. I left my firm and now work as a private consultant for newly divorced women navigating financial independence. Women like me. Women who once whispered in the dark, "This can't be all there is." Julian never contested the divorce. Maybe because he knew the deeper he dug, the more truth I would unearth. I kept the accounts. The car, the business shares. And I sold the beach house to a preservation trust, where it's now used for writing retreats and marine research programs. I haven't spoken to Julian since. Camille gave birth 3 months ago. Noah sent a picture. A baby girl with deep brown eyes and a tiny smile. "Her name's Eve," the message read. "She reminds me of the truth. Small, clear, and impossible to ignore. We talk occasionally. Sometimes it's just a line. Saw an old lighthouse that made me think of that night." Or, "Are you still breathing clean air and drinking good coffee?" No promises, no expectations. Just respect. And a kind of friendship born not from love, but from survival. Last week, I found an old playlist on my phone. One Julian used to tease me about. "Too emotional," he said. I played it as I drove along the coast, windows down, wind in my hair, and I smiled. Not because I forgot, but because I had finally gone far enough to remember without pain. They say betrayal is the end of a love story, but I don't believe that anymore. Sometimes betrayal is just the beginning of your own, because the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's rebuilding. It's walking away with your head high and your heart intact. It's choosing yourself when they thought you never would. And it's waking up one morning, early, quietly, with no alarm, just sunlight streaming through the window, and realizing you are finally free.